Hello, everyone, and welcome back. We're going to continue on with the looping today. So last time we have talked about the 4x and range style of the loops, and before that we had seen some basic looping with some of the other kinds of looping, 4x and range, for example, 4x and s to process over the strings. And so today what we're going to look at is some of the more complicated things that you can do with string processing, which will involve the looping. Again, that's going to have to do with accumulating things into that accumulator. For example, collecting the characters out of the string, or the other thing we might be doing is we might be doing some counting exercises where we're accumulating things that we have counted. For example, cycling over and counting how many vowels we've seen, or counting how many of the character B that we've seen, some of these things that we've taken a look at or that we are going to see today. So you can combine these together and actually get some pretty powerful ways of processing the strings. So we're going to take a look at a few more of those examples, and then we're also going to take a look at comparing and contrasting the kinds of loops, specifically with converting between the loop types, so that you will be ready to, for example, be given one kind of a loop, and then there would be an expectation that you should be able to cycle over and work with another kind of a loop. So let me go ahead and share the screen. And so here's some example of string processing using the while loop. One can combine iteration with indexing to process a string. And here we're going to do this with the while loop. So here we have a definition of a function called myLoopString and takes an S for string in. Here we're going to give it the name Erie. Here we're going to have our signature string to none type, so we see that it's returning nothing because it's going to be printing to the screen, so it returns none, and the type of none is, of course, none type. Prints each character of the string. So remember that when we are working with the while loops that we are going to need to initialize our loop variable, otherwise this will be undefined. So here's our initialization of the counter, I equals 0. While I is less than the length of the string, so we will process over each. We will print s of I. So in this case, we see that we're going to be using that indexing. So I is numeric, right? So I currently is equal to 0. So s of 0 means looking at this and taking out the 0th position, that's E. So it's going to print the E. And now we're going to augment the I by 1. So I will increment up to 1. So when we go to the back to the top of the loop, I is now 1, which is still less than the length of the string, being 1, 2, 3, 5. Okay, so now we'll print s of I at the 1th position, that is this lowercase e. We print that right here. We increment our I by 1 to make it 2, and back to the top of the loop. Is 2 less than the length of the string, being 5? Sure is. S of 2 will give us the R. We increment, and then we'll also get the I at 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, yes. And then we'll get the at the 4th position, we will collect this last E. Then we increment this by 1 to get 5. Is 5 less than the length of the string? It is not. They are equal. So this is a false branch guard at this point, which terminates the execute of the while loop. That brings us outside of the loop, and then we encounter the return, which terminates the execution of the function, and then it ends. And so that's how this loop will work. All right, now it's time for you to take a look at this string processing, spot the bugs. So here's a count S of river. We're going to send up the name of 2 different rivers, and then we're going to send a string. Looks good. And we're going to return an integer. It counts the number of times the letter S, lowercase s or uppercase s, appears in a river name. This version may have bugs. All right, so why don't you go ahead and pause the video and see if you can spot some of the things that might be wrong with this code. All right, we'll see you back in a few minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I hope you had a chance to look through that code and see if you could spot any bugs. All right, so the first thing that we notice is that we need to initialize, we need to do some initialization, right? So here we are going to have our while loop, right? So we have I equals 1 here, but if we want to process over the whole string, we're going to need to initialize I at 0 because Python starts at 0. So we need to make sure we start off with I equals 0. The next thing that we need to do is we need to have the counts equal to 0. Sorry, I think I keep flipping in the wrong direction. Okay, and our counts is equal to 0 here, so that's good. So we need to make sure that the counts are correct. You must increment the index I to cycle over the river. So we need to have I plus equals 1 to increment the index. If you forget this, what will happen? You will create that infinite loop, and that's going to be an issue. So we need to be sure to have that. We also need to have the case insensitivity. So that means that it should collect either account for upper or lowercase s. And so we can do that by running the position. So we have river of I, and we're choosing to run it through the dot lower is equal to s. So any capitals would be converted into lowercase. And so that would make this case insensitive so that we would be invariant to the case. So then hopefully that should take care of all of our problems then. And when we go ahead and run this on Mississippi, we can count the S's. So let's just get a sense for ourselves. 1, 2, 3, 4. So there should be 4 S's in there, and Python agrees with us, which is great. And here we're going to do the sign running through Paris. This one has 1 S, and we take care of that invariance and the capitalization by doing the dot lower. All right, so here's another example. This one is a great one, counting the vowels. Write a function that will count how many vowels are present in some input string S. So that's going to be harder. We can't just use dot upper or dot lower. How could we check to see if something is a vowel? We can process S using a for loop. And we're going to call another function called isVowel to determine if each letter in S is a vowel or not. So this is how we can check for whether or not it's a vowel. So this suggests we should write 2 different functions. Remember that you can have a function call inside of another function, so this could involve that. It should be case independent. If it is a vowel, it should increment an accumulator count to keep track of how many vowels have been found as the loop progresses, and we can increment the accumulator. Assume that the vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. And so if we do count vowels in Erie, there are 3 of them, 2 E's and 1 I, a capital, and 2 lowercase. All right, so again, you have the option to pause this video and try out this challenge to see if you can do this. This is a great exercise. All right, we'll see you back in a few moments. All right, great. I hope you had a chance to have a look at that. Let's take a look at how we might do this. This is my solution. You might have come up with something a little bit different, but this can just walk you through how this can be done. So we have our isVowel function and our countVowels function. Remember that when we have our function call, that Python is going to be running, and before it actually encounters that function call, it's going to read in both of these functions. Now I actually omitted the function call to get this started just for the space requirements here, but you can also just call your function from typing it here at the command prompt after you have done your loading this in. So you do run module, and you can type that over here, or you can put your function call under here. And again, I'm just not showing that because it's kind of a long script. All right, so let's just take a look here. We have our isVowel of character. And so what we're going to do is we are going to determine whether or not something is a vowel. Now, the interesting way that we've done this is we've made use of the in order to do this. So we take some character. So this is assuming we'll take in a string, 1 character, and it's going to return a true or false. This is a common way of doing processing, to return true or to return false, because then we can use that as part of our branch guard. We'll see that coming up in the count vowels. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a precondition that the length of the character is going to be 1. So this should only take in 1 character, and it's going to test if the character is a vowel. So we will test to see if it is a vowel by, first of all, processing the character into the lowercase. And then we will check to see if that lowercase character is in A, E, I, O, or U. This would not work if we had multiple characters. So this is why we have to process it with being just a length of 1. So if it is in here, it will return the Boolean that responds to whether or not it is in this string. If it is, then this will return true, indicating it is a vowel. And if it isn't, it will return false, indicating it's not a vowel. So you'll see that is vowel works kind of like is upper, is lower, the Python built-ins, but now you have customized it to deal with a specific case of vowels. Here is our count vowels of string function. This is going to return the count of vowels that we have. This takes a string in, and it returns an integer, that is the total counts, and returns the number of vowels in a string. And we can make use of our isVowel function. So let's see how we do this. We are going to have a counter being equal to 0. So we initialize that to 0. So we're going to return then the total number of counts. Now we're going to have a for loop for a character in S. So again, we'll step over the given prompt. So it's Erie, so we'll step over that, and the character will become each of those in that word. So if is vowel of character. So you see, this kind of looks like really bizarre syntax, because it doesn't say, you know, if is vowel equals true. But the reason is because, remember this, Python is going to process this right here, just like you'd process the inner parentheses in math. Is vowel is going to return a Boolean. So you'll get if true or if false. So you don't really need the equals true or the equals false. If is vowel of character, will send up the character. So if we send up that capital E of Erie, the character will now become a local variable inside the is vowel scope. We are going to return the result of lowercase of e, which is lower e, in A, E, I, or U. Oh, it is right there. So that will return true, which means that this will be true. So now we get if true, count plus equals 1. So our counter now increments by 1 using augmented assignment. Okay, and then we cycle on to the next one, to R. And so now we do if is vowel of character, so character being sent up as R. Character dot lower, so it is already lower in A, E, I, O, or U. No, it's not, so this returns false. So we get if false. So the branch guard is false, and this never runs. So we go outside the if block, and that means we go back to the top of the for loop, right? So next it will be pointing to I. Now, if is vowel of character, which is I, sent to this function up here, return character dot lower, I, N, A, I, O, U. That is true. It's right here. That returns true into the if. So now the branch guard is true, and we will increment the count by 1. So we've had ERI, so we have up to 2 now, back to the top, and now for character in S points to that final E. If is the vowel of character being E again, which we know that it is, character dot lower in A, E, I, O, U will return true. So that will become true, and that means the count will increment by 1 more, which brings us up to a final count of 3. We are at the end of the string, so the for loop exits, and now we hit this return, which terminates the execution of the function, and our count is at 3, so we return the count. of 3, which we see right here. That's how that works. This is a really good one to study. This is a nice complicated one where you see that you can do some pretty sophisticated processing of your strings using just 2 functions. Next, I want to talk to you about the loop interconversions. It's possible to interconvert between the various types of loops. So oftentimes there's a more expedient choice, but it is useful to know how the different types of loops all relate to each other so that we can see what the similarities and the differences of them are. So we want to rewrite this while loop using a for loop instead. Then we try to use a for loop with range. So we're going to try to rewrite this loop doing the looping in several different ways. Here we have count S version 2 of River. Remember, we had encountered this before. We have a string coming in and we're returning an integer. This counts the number of times S or capital or lowercase s appears in a river. So we have I equals 0, initializing our index, and the counts is at 0. And remember, we had our while loop looping over this. We have indexing. We have this dot lower in order to take care of switching the capitalization all to lowercase, so it's case insensitive. This is where our counter for the actual answer increments. This is the loop variable, the other variable that we have that's going to increment the index to keep the while loop going, and this will return the counts. So we've been through this in quite a lot of detail before. So now the challenge is, can you rewrite this using a for loop instead? All right, so feel free to pause the video, go have a look at that. You can chat with your neighbor, and when are ready for the answer, we look forward to seeing you joining back in a few moments. All right, well, I hope you had the chance to look that over. Let's talk through a possible solution for this. So you may have come up with something a little bit different, but there should be some key features that are going to be the same as what I'm going to show you here. For comparison, I'm going to just bring our while loop version along with us so that we can refer to that, so that we can look to see what's the same and what's different. So this is the for loop version that we are hoping to come up with. So here we go. We're going to have count S 4, and then we're going to have the S right here. So it's a good idea when you're making your new function, make sure you always choose a new name for it. You shouldn't have 2 functions with the same name in it inside of your script, right? So you always want to make sure you have a different one. All right, so I did use different variable names between these 2, but that actually is pretty inconsequential. And we're going to take a string in and send an integer out. So the reason why I actually changed this variable name is just so we'll have S for string to remind ourselves that this is the string. So notice that we don't have initialization for the loop variable. That's because we're doing for I and S. Now remember that for something in a string, that this index is going to be of the actual character, right? So it's not going to be numeric the way that this index is numeric. And also because the for loop has implicit variable assignment for the loop index, it's not necessary to initialize it. So over here, we had the loop initialization of I equals 0, but in this case, we don't have that. But we still need to initialize the counts because we haven't encountered any, anything yet. And so we're going to do that. So now we're going to do for I and S, if I dot lower is equal to S, we're going to look for that match. So that is the same if statement, except that there are some syntax differences. So the dot lower part is the same, but we need to do river of I because I is a numeric index, right? So that will be river of I will take that slice to get the character. But in the for loop, the I is already the character, so you don't need to take the slice. So that's what's so great about this kind of looping. It does simplify things quite a bit. So if that I dot lower is equal to the desired character, then we can go ahead and increment the counts, which is the same over here. Now, our looping variable needs to be incremented on the while loop, but when we are in the for loop, notice that we do not need to increment the looping variable. And that is because the looping happens automatically. So the I will simply move over to be equal to the next character. So that's an important difference between the two kinds. And here we just have some print statements to run some test cases for each of these. So that's how you can go from a while loop to a for loop. That's an example of what that might look like. Suppose you want to instead use for x in range. All right. So now we have the same numeric index, but in the while loop, we need to initialize it, whereas in working with the for loops, the index gets initialized automatically. Again, we need to set the counts equal to 0 in both cases because that's just an accumulator kind of a variable. So here we have while I is less than the length of river, and in this case, we're going to have for I in range length of the S. So I'm just calling it S to remind us that it's a string. So it's pretty much the same as river. So we're going to use for I in range because we're going to go up to but not including that numeric value. This one is also using the length, but we'll use the length directly. So the syntax is a little different, but it's got a very similar idea. Now, in this case, we needed to pull out using the numeric index to pull out that character. And again, we need to do that. So we'll do S of I, and again, dealing with the case sensitivity, running it through the dot lower. And so we will compare to the S. Then if it is true, we will increment the count by 1. And here we will cycle over all of this, and we will return count as our variable. So that gives you a sense of how you could go between the while loop and the for x in range loop version. So this concludes our discussion on the looping and string processing. We focused on the for loops in this current series of lectures from this week. We did the for loops with the strings. We did the for loops using range, where we did for x and s, which is the kind that is going to work with the actual character. And then we also did the numeric version of that, where we use the start, stop, and delta. So both of those are ways you can use the for loops with range and just a plain for loop. And so we also have seen loops with numerical indices for the string processing. So we've gone back and reviewed while loops a bit and seen how we can pull out a position in a string with that. And we can also do the for x in range also with the numeric indices to process over the string. And finally, we have just taken a look at the integer version of loops, where we wrote loops to do similar tasks, but we used a variety of different looping styles. Well, then I hope this has been really helpful and instructive for you to see. Looping does tend to be one of those little bit more challenging topics. So I hope that this has made it a little bit more clear for you on that. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you have enjoyed the lecture, and we look forward to seeing you the next time. Bye.